Afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Samach, and we're starting about 20 lines up or so from the bottom on Nun Testament Bays. Let's get started at the two dots there. Mikudeshes Lasheni. We had said that, remember the cases we discussed, that Masha Asa Aswe Lashanag Minagramos, that if I say, please go help me get married to person X, and you instead get married to person X, even though you were sent on my behalf, the Gemara says that she's mikudeshes l'sheni, that if I sent you, she's married to you, but what you did was not yashar. So the Gemara picks up with mikudeshes l'sheni, amarav mikudeshes l'sheni la'olam, that they're married forever, namely that it's a full Kiddushin. Ushmuel amar mikudeshes l'sheni ad lamed yom. No, the Kiddushin's only chal up to day 30, but it's not chal any longer than that. And once we get to after the 30th day, the Kiddushin that was supposed to be from the first person is chal, because that was what the Mishnah had said, mikan ve'ad shloshim yom. So there, under those circumstances, the Kiddushin would be mufka from the second person, v'gamri kedushay rishon, and then she'd be married seemingly automatically back to the first person, which is a little bit of an odd construct. The Gemara says, Yosef Rav Chiza v'kokashe, that this was hard for him to understand. Kedushay sheni b'may paka. You got to end the Kiddushin. And what do you mean? It just happens automatically? This is difficult. So Amalei Rav Yosef, Mar Aresha Masni Lavakashila. Mar, the person who presented this, Rav, understood this machlokes. Well, it's not really Rav. The Gemara presents Rav and Shmuel discussing the first case, but that's maybe not the case. Rabbi Yehuda, perhaps what Rabbi Yehuda, who presented, doesn't even say his name. Rabbi Yehuda says, Aseifa Masni Lavakashile. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that this machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, is not talking about the first case. What's the case we're talking about? But rather, me'achshav u'le'achar shloshim yom, this more complex language that was found in our Mishnah that we learned yesterday at the end of the Mishnah, that if a person said me'achshav ve'ad shloshim yom, in a case like that, that's where we have machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Amar Rav, in that case, mikudeshes ve'ena mikudeshes le'olam, she's stuck in a state of confusion. She's married, but she's not. And Shmuel Amar mikudeshes ve'ena mikudeshes elad lamed yom, she's only in the suffix status until lamed yom, and la'achar lamed yom paki kedushay shen v'gamri kedushay rishon. And after 30 days hits, the Kiddushin of the second person is uprooted. This is a little bit easier to understand because here it wasn't a proper Kiddushin. We were besuffic if there was a Kiddushin. It wasn't like a regular Kiddushin. According to the first approach of the Gemara, where we presented the machlokes, we assumed there was, Rav had said that it's Kiddushin la'olam, that they're mamish mekudeshes proper. So here we're not saying that. Here we're saying that the whole thing is a suffix. We're not sure if her Kiddushin was chal. In a case like that, then we allow for the Havkos Kiddushin of the second person to dissolve on the 30th day, and then she will in fact be married to person number one. Let's get into the lamdas, 10 lines from the bottom. The Rav Mesafkale itna havai ichazar havai. According to Rav, when he said me'achshav ve'ad lamed yom, we don't know if it's a t'nai, the 30 days, or if it's a chazara, that maybe by day 30 I'm going to want to unmarry you. We don't know what his intent was. So the Rav Mesafkale itna havai ichazar havai Shmuel. But according to Shmuel, pshita le t'nai, he says that it's actually pasha, that it's a t'nai. And therefore, because it's a Tanai Kiddushin, once day 30 hits, then that marriage of the woman to man number one is put into place, and the suffix Kiddushin between man number two and the woman is removed. And perhaps, says the Gemara, this is connected to the following machlokas. The Tanya me'ayamula achar misa, get ve'eno get. If a person wants to institute a get, and he does so with the language of mehayom ula achar misa, today and after misa, with the nafkamina being yibu, right? If she dies, if they're divorced before he dies, divorce doesn't lead to yibum, but death does lead to yibum. So what's the din over here? Get ve'eno get. They hold that it's halfsies. We're not really sure if they're divorced. It's a language of suffix. If a person says me'ayom ula achar misa by a get, it's a language of suffix according to the chachamim. Rav Omer kazeh get. No, this is mamash a get. She's divorced. No yibum. Rav says halacha kirabon, and perhaps Rav, where we had said a few lines ago, where he was mikudeshes ve'ena mikudeshes, in the case of me'achshav ula'achar shloshim yom. So there maybe Rav holds like the Rabbanan who were besafik, and v'nema, perhaps we can say Shmuel halacha. V'nema, we should perhaps say that Shmuel is halacha kirebi, that he holds like Rebbe. The shitas do seem to align. So it says the Gemara hints to this question. If we have a brisa that's reflecting the same exact shitas in Rav and Shmuel, why do we have Rav and Shmuel? Rav and Shmuel shouldn't be teaching us things that are extraneous. Rav and Shmuel should be qualifying, adding things, whatever the role of an Amora is, which is to learn a Mishnah, to learn sources in the Tanaim and qualify. But here, Why do we need them at all? So Zog the Gemara as follows, 7 lines from the bottom, Tzricha. We needed the shitas of Rav and Shmuel to be articulated in the case of Me'achshav Ula'achar Shloshim Yom. Why is that? Tzricha Di'ilu Amar Rav Halacha Kirabanan. If we would have said that Rav would hold like the Rabbanon, so Havamina, that's only Hasam de la Rechoka Kasi, because the Shita of the Rabbanon was found in a case of divorce where the goal was to distance the husband from the wife. But in the case that we were dealing with Rav and Shmuel of Me'achshav Ula'achar Shloshim, which was a case of Kiddushin, Hacha de la Krova Kasi, Ema Mo de la Shmuel, that's not. But perhaps you'd say that that case is different and that really we hold like Shmuel. Maybe there would be no machlokas. And at the same time, v'yamar Shmuel halacha kiRebbi, if we would have said that Shmuel holds like Rebbe, havamina hasamu de'ein get la'achar misa, that's only because there's no such thing as a get la'achar misa. Aval hacha diyesh Kiddushin la'achar lamed, but in our case, the case which was presented me'achshav la'achar lamed yom, there because there is Kiddushin after 30 days, emamod Rav tzricha, then perhaps Shmuel in that case would have agreed to Rav kamash malon tzricha, that we need to have both the case of Rav and Shmuel as well as the brisa that preceded them. According to the Shita of Rav, who in regards to Kiddushin had said Mekudeshes ve'ena Mekudeshes la'olam, she's in a status of Safek, 2 lines from the bottom, then the following 3-layered cake would be true. Man number 1 goes over to a woman and says, "Oh, you're hereby married to me from right now, once we get to day 30. This is going to be somewhat of a brain teaser. And then another man goes up to her and says, Hared Mekudeshes li, and we'll be married by day 20. And then top of Samach Hamad Aleph, so then the Gemara says, "Me rishon me achron tzricha get." Only in regards to the first case and the last, the man who said 30 days and the man who said 10 days do we need to get? But umeim tzai ain't tzricha get. So this is what is an inference. Again, we don't really have time to develop this properly, but this is an inference from the Shita of Rav, who held Mekudeshes in a Mekudeshes. And the Gemara now on the top of Samach Amad Aleph, 4 lines down, explains the Shita of Rav. Manav Shach Itna Havai. If Rav was of the opinion that it really was a Tanai, then if it's a Tanai, Dekama Kiddushe Dehanach Lav Kiddushe, then only the first person's Kiddushin would be valid because he's going to be the end of the story. So then that person, the first person, would be the only one that she'd be married to. If it was condition, if it was a recanting of the Kiddushin, then Debasra Kiddushe Dehanach Lav Kiddushe, then only the last one would be Kiddushin and none of the others. And therefore, that must be the Shita of Rav, an extension. Abaye extends the Shita of Rav. Excuse me. The Gemara then says, Pshita, that should be fairly obvious. The reason why we had to be mechadesh this, what was Abaye doing by extending the Shita of Rav? He was teaching us that we might have thought that it was mashma to know, mashma chazara, that perhaps Rav was of the opinion that we're choshesh, that it's both a t'nai and a chazara. And without Abaye, we might have thought that in a case like this, we would need to get from all 3 people. The one who said, Me'achshav ula'achar shloshim yom, ula'achar esem yom, and ula'achar asar yomim, kamash malon, that's not true. We've seen 2 shitas. We've seen Rav and Shmuel. The Gemara now introduces a 3rd shita, 10 lines down on Samach Hamad Aleph. Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan afilu me'atov sinba. No, everyone would have tfisas kedushin. Let's say we had the 3 cases up top, and Rav said in such a case we would say that only the first and third need to get. No, if there's 100 people in a row who do the same thing, one says 30 days, one says 29 days, one says 28 days, one says 20. They're all going to be kedushin ischal to some degree, and they all need to get. And that's why Rav Yochanan was of the opinion afilu me'atov sinba v'chein Amar Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan afilu me'atov sinba. So now we have to figure out the shita of Rav Yochanan. Why does he say that everyone has a chalos kedushin? We explained according to Rav why we thought that the first and third needed one. One would be the approach of chazara. The other would be the approach of a t'nai. So what about Rav Yochanan? So says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down. Amar le Rav Mishar Shebrei the Rav Ami the Rav Asi Asberalach Taima the Rav Yochanan. He said, I understand the reason of Rav Yochanan. Shavu nafshayu kishraga delivni. The husband, let's say the first husband who said, he made himself like a stack of bricks. This is a mashal. We know that if you have a case scenario, you have a couple of bricks, right? We have 2 bricks next to here's 1 brick and here's another brick. The brick that goes on top is in between the 2. So here's 1 brick and then the bricks underneath are staggered. The way you see bricks on our homes, it's a safer way to build them. The walls are less likely to fall. So the Gemara says that when you put that 1 brick on top of 2 bricks, there's space on the sides. It's just a mashal hedyot. And what the Gemara means to say is that when the guy said 30 days, he left some space for other people. So what does that therefore mean? So he therefore says that it therefore is really the case that all the Kiddushin's in that space, the 30 days, however many days he left, that makes that Kiddushin actually Chal. That's the sheet of Rav Yochanan with a Mashal Hedjo. Asks the Gemara, Nisht Pasha, the sheet of Rav Yochanan is not so simple. Masi Rav Chanina Meyam Alachar Misa, get veino get. We have a case in regards to Gittin that if a man says you are divorced hereby from today or after my death, you're half divorced. We're unsure. There's a suffix about your divorce status. V'imeis, and if he dies, choletzes v'lo misya bemes. So what does that mean? If we do chalitza and not yibum, well, when do you do yibum? You do yibum when the husband dies. So here we're not sure if the get was in fact chal. If the get was chal, there's no yibum. If the get wasn't chal and he died, then it should be chalitza. If the get wasn't chal, then yeah, it should be chalitza. That's true. One more time. If the get is not chal, so that means that there's death and there should be yibum in that case. So the Gemara says, this fits nicely with Rav, because Rav was of the opinion on the previous page of Mekudeshes, Ve'enu Mekudeshes. But Shmuel Nami, we could also explain this brisa according to Shmuel Hamani. Who is this Shita? Like Rabbanan, Hivana da Amri Rebbe, like the Machlokes and the brisa we saw on the bottom by Gittin, that Rebbe held one way, the Rabbanan held another, and really Shmuel holds like Rebbe. But this brisa, the one that was quoted just a couple lines ago in the name of Reb Chanina, was really another shita. It was the shita of the Rabbanan. Elo the Rabbi Yochanan damar shiur habe kol gita de meshayer b'avalu klumhu yivu memiyabe. Should, according to Rabbi Yochanan, this should mamish be a full get, just like you're saying it's a full Kiddushin. You should also say it's a full get. Amar Rava get lahotzi misa lahotzi. We know that a get is made for divorce, and death also ends up ending their marriage. Masha shiur beget gemarto misa. Whatever's left over of the get, the Gemara says, this is Rabbi Yochanan Svara, death will complete it. So says the Gemara, that's ridiculous. How are you comparing kitten to Misa? After all, Amar le'abayi midami, get motziyim rishus yavam, Misa machneses l'rishus yavam. You can't put get and Misa in the same sentence. Get is supposed to take a person out of the rishus of a yavam. Misa is supposed to enter a person into the rishus of a yavam. Amar abayi, must be hasam time of my. What's the reason why we say choletzes v'lo misya bemes in that brisa? Gzera mishum mehayom im mesi, because of a different language. The reason why we're concerned about mehayom achar misa and we say chalitza is allowed and not yibum is because of a similar case of mehayom im mesi hareza get. Says the Gemara, that's great, but if that's true, last of the short lines on Samech Hamad Aleph, nigzor mehayom im mesi detachlots atu mehayom achar misa. Perhaps we should have a two-directional concern. And in regards to the case of mehayom mesi, we should have said there we should do chalitza, because that case has also clearly interchangeable with mehayom achar misa. Should be two-directional. Says the Gemara, no, in that case, in the case of Me'ayomi Mesi, once you say that there's chalitza, then that's enough to say that there's yibum. Hachanami, we would have made that same concern to say, so says the Gemara, okay, great. So in such a case, we should say, it's only a din derabanan, and therefore the Gemara concludes in regards to the concern of the Gemara of Nigzor Hayomi Mesi to Tachlots Atu Me'ayom La'achar Misa. That brings us to a new Mishnah. We're going to be learning today until the next Mishnah, which is 10 lines or so from the bottom of Samech Hamid Beis. I have a short amount of time left, so I'm going to be moving fairly quickly. Let's get started with the new Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down Samech Hamid Aleph. The Mishnah reads, Omer li isha red ad mekudeshes li al menashe etin lach masayim zuz. And it says, we will hereby be married if I give you 200 zuz. They're married and he has to give her the money. We're going to analyze what the words yitain means. Doesn't mean that they're not married until the money comes in. Doesn't mean that they're married immediately. We'll discuss that later. If a person says on condition that I give you the money within 30 days. So if nasan it just depends on whether or not you fulfill the condition. Then the 3 lines before the end of the Mishnah, on condition that I have 200 zuz, it's only true if he actually has 200 zuz. Says the closing case of the Mishnah, it's only going to be the case that if he says on the condition that I have 200 zuz that are married, but provided that he had, and if he was a money changer and he said, oh, come look into the gospel mind, you'll see that I have so much money. So that's not a right, because that's his money. Let's start the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Rav Huna Amar V'hu Yitain, Rav Yehuda Amar Licha Sheyitain. V'hu Yitain, the first approach that's discussed is that they're married right now. He just has to give the money at a later point. That's the Shita of Rav Huna, but they're already married. Rav Yehuda Amar Licha Sheyitain. No, they're only married once the money is transferred. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna Amar V'hu Yitain to not have a it's a condition. He's going to fulfill the condition. All is well and good. As long as he fulfills it down the road, at some point, they're going to be married back to this moment. It's only when the money's actually given. Until the money's given over, you're not married. The condition needs to be fulfilled first. It can't be fulfilled in theory. It has to be fulfilled in practice. The difference between them is what if during the time, let's say he said, on the condition that I give you 200 Jews in 30 days. So yeah, according to one shita, the Gemara says that they're married right away. And one shita says they're not married right away, only when he gives the money. L'may nafkamina. The Gemara says the difference would be a case where she accepted Kiddushin from another man. The Rav Huna, who said that they were already married on the day of his verbal commitment to her, lo have a Kiddushin because she's already married. The Rabbi Huda, who said that the verbal commitment wasn't the makib patish of the marriage, and we have to wait until the money actually changes hands, then in such a case, havu Kiddushin, then the marriage, the proposal to the new guy is going to work because he's not married. She's not yet married to the first guy. And it's not nami. We have a very similar case. We're going to ask why this is true, but we have a very similar machlokes in regards to gabe gittin. Ki agavna, same thing. 4 lines from the bottom. Ha'omer li isha, man says to a woman, azegite chalmanas, shetisni li masayim zuz. That's a conditional get. As long as you give me 200 zuz, the din is harez on the gureshes v'hititain. Then you're going to be divorced as long, and the money has to be given. We have to figure out what this word v'hutitain means as well, and it's going to be the same machlokas. It's marked 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says, don't worry, they're divorced now, even if he gives the money at a later point. And Rabbi Yehuda Amar Licha Shetiti, they're only divorced once the money is given. Rabbi Yehuda Amar V'hu Tno Habe and Mekayma Tno Ba'asa. As long as you do it at some point, no problem, you'll be divorced. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Licha Shetiti and Licha Yuav Alein, who the Habagat only when the money has transferred over. Hashtamiya lo Habagat, but for the moment, it's actually not considered to be a get. So the machlokas exists both by Kiddushin and in regards to Gittin. So now the Gemara is going to know. First of all, what's the difference between them by Gittin? So the Gemara says the difference is if the get was torn, or if the get was lost in the meantime, between the time he said whatever the language is. If you're going to be divorced, if I give you 200 zuz, if we say the money has to change hands first, so then they're not divorced yet. And if the document was ruined, then they won't ever be divorced because the get was ruined. The Rav Huna have a get, the Rav Yehuda lo have a get, and each of them according to their own shitas. So now the Gemara is bothered. Why is it that we have this exact case scenario, the same machlokas between them, both by Kiddushin and by Gerushin? The Gemara says, V'tzricha, Diashman and Gabe Kiddushin, if we only had the machlokas of Huna and Rav Yehuda by Kiddushin, perhaps the only reason that Rav Huna held the way that he held was because it was the Lakurva Ka'asi that they're trying to get married. But when they're trying to get divorced, they're trying to distance themselves from one another. Perhaps Rav Huna would agree to Rav Yehuda. And the flip is also so true. If you only had the case of Kiddushin, of Gerushin, if we only had the machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda by Gerushin, is because there's no embarrassment in regards to divorce to ask for money. They're angry at each other. That's every case of mediation and divorce. Give me every penny that you have. And by Kiddushin, she's uncomfortable to say that I want more money. That's not the lo naim. Harad mekudeshesli, on the condition I give you $200 and you gave me $175. I'm going to ask you, but it's awkward to ask for the 25. So we needed to have all of these cases because otherwise it would have been unclear. Therefore, the Gemara goes out of its way to show us a machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, both in regards to Kiddushin and in regards to Gerushin. 10, 12 lines down, we're heading down to the Mishnah. The Gemara says as follows, where we have a kasha. If a man says that there's a conditional get on the condition that you give me 200 zuz, and then at a later point the get was torn, and while that's true that she still shouldn't get married until the money is given over, but lamaisa, she's megureshes. So that's a big kasha. Why? What does that show us? That shows us that they're divorced, which means that the condition could happen even at a later point. Rav Huna was of the opinion, if we look back on the bottom of Samech Amar Aleph. Rav Huna was of the opinion that it's tonight can happen down the road, and Rav Yehuda said it's only lichashatitain once it's actually given over. It's not once it's actually given over, according to this Gemara. According to this Gemara, that's a big problem. So that's a kasha on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. And not only that, ve'od, a quarter of the way down, Tanya, we have a brisa, Amar La, Reza Gite Chalmanash Shatisni Li Masayim Zuzumes, Nasna Ein Zkuka Liyavam. If the money was given, then she won't have to be given to a yavam, because they're halachically divorced, and a woman who's divorced doesn't go to a yavam, only a woman who dies childless, a woman whose husband died while she's childless. And below nas, if the money wasn't given over, zekuka liyavam. If the money wasn't given over, there was no divorce, and then his death is a regular death, and if she has no children from him, then zekuka liyavam, she has to marry his brother. So says the Gemara, that's only the Tanakama Rishba Gomer, no senes la'achiv o la'aviv o la'echad min hakrovim, that it can be given over, the money can be given over to others. Okay, so here the Gemara says as follows: Akan lo pligi, this machlokes Tanakama Reb Shimon ben Gamliel el demar savar li v'lo liyorshi umar savar afilu liyorshar. According to some, the money could only be given over to a yorish, but the Kulei Alma, both of these shitas in the Brisa seem to hold Miyat to know have you have to do Rabbi Yehuda. This is a rejection of Rabbi Yehuda. Wanted to say that when a person puts a condition in, we don't have to wait till the money actually transfers hands. We can say that they're going to be asura, that they're going to be megureshes even before the money transfers hands. Kasha against Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, Amar lach Rabbi Yehuda, no problem. How money that Brisa is only going to a shita of Rabbi. Rabbi do Amar Rav Huna Amar Rabbi. We learned this in a previous Masechta. I should say, we learned it earlier in this Masechta. Person says almanas, they don't mean it as a tonight, they mean from this very moment. That's really what it means. The rabbis disagree with the shita of Rabbi. Rabbi says almanas is me'achshav. The Rabbanan don't. The Rabbanan say that almanas does not mean me'achshav. Almanas is a proper tonight, and that's why Rabbi Huda says that when you make a tonight, you have to wait till the tonight is fulfilled. Masha'enken, according to Rav Huna and according to Rabbi, well, the tonight is enough. Just saying almanas is enough, because that is the same thing as saying me'achshav. That ends this little sugya, but now we're going to dig into that last line that we just saw. We're just about halfway down on Samech Hamid Beis. The Gemara continues as follows: Gufa, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi. We're going to analyze that line, that anyone who says almanas, it's as if you say right now, it's not really a condition. You're just saying, I want to be divorced from right now, or married, whatever the condition is. Amar Reb Zera, ki avin Bavel, when we were in Bavel, Hava Amrin on Hada, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi, Kol Amar Almanas, Kol Amar Me'achshav Dami, Paligi Rabbanan Alei. When we were in Bavel, we used to say that there was taka machlokes about this, about whether or not almanas was considered to be me'achshav, or if it was a functional tonight. However, Salki Lahasa, when I got to Eretz Yisrael, then Ashkachte Ravasi. So I met Ravasi, the Yossi V'Karmel Mishmed Rav Yochanan. He was quoting Rav Yochanan, who said, "Akol modim be'omer almanas ke'omer me'achshav dami." Everybody agrees. There is no machlokes. Everybody agrees in Eretz Yisrael. In Bavel, there was a machlokes about almanas. Is almanas me'achshav or is almanas at tonight? But l'chor in Eretz Yisrael, there was no machlokes about almanas. Almanas was nothing. It was all me'achshav. Almanas was not a tonight. It was never a tonight. It's basically just saying that I want this to happen right now. The only time that there was a machlokes was about la'achar misa. Where do we see this? So that's where they have a machlokes. But almanas, according to everybody, l'chora, like in Eretz Yisrael, is going to be that almanas is me'achshav. What about Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda had a different shita. So why is it that if they're arguing in one, they should be arguing in the other? So says the Gemara, why don't we bring the case of La'achar Misa? That case is also a good case. Why are we only talking about the case of Almanas? Not we should bring La'achar Misa too. Says the Gemara, Lo decha kocha the Rebbe, to teach us the power of Rebbe's shita. Because Rebbe was of the opinion that kozeh, that even if a person said miyom la'achar misa, that's going to be kozeh. Says the Gemara, maybe we should talk about the case of almanas, because that shows us the koach of the Rabbanon, that the Rabbanon held that almanas was a tonight. Says the Gemara, koach that tera adif, Rebbe's psak is bigger, because it gave us a bigger matir, and we always like to learn from the more mechudash case. Koach de tera adif. Three more small, tiny little pieces of Gemara, where 15 lines from the bottom, second last of the short lines on Samech Hamid Beis. The Gemara says almanas she'etein lochamikan until a later date. Pshita says the Gemara ma'udateim alav tanahu lezruze kamer. If a person says I'm going to give you money up until 30 days, whatever the details are in the Mishnah. So maybe that's why do we have to teach this case? Because I might have thought that it's not a Tanai, it's just to Lazar Zekamar, just a chapra. It's a hyperbole. I'm going to give you $1,000 if we don't get married by Tuesday. You didn't mean $1,000, says the Gemara. Yes, you did. Kamash Malan. Those words that come out of your mouth are meaningful words, and therefore the amount of time that you stipulated in the Mishnah is real in regards to the Kiddushin. First of the middle width lines, on condition that I have Masayim Zuz, says the Gemara, we should be very concerned that in fact he has. We have a brisa like that. So says the Gemara, how do we understand the fact that we should be concerned about this? The Gemara says, it depends what our concerns are. If we want Kiddushin Vada, we need a greater level of birur. If you want to have Kiddushin Safek, we need no level of birur, because somebody who says that, we don't have to check their bank account. I can fear that he has that much money. Lamaisa, if we look in the Rishonim, I didn't. I'm just saying in theory, if you have a billionaire, so maybe by him there's no chashash. Depends. Okay, let's just learn these last two little sugyas. On condition that I show you 200 zuz. Of course, he's obviously only talking about showing his own money. What's the value in showing anybody else's money? And last but not least, that if I work at a Costco and I have tens of thousands of dollars behind the thick bulletproof glass, so lemaisa that money is pasha, not mine. So why would there be a havamina? Why would the Mishnah even bother teaching a din that if I'm a shulchani, that I'm a money changer? Why would we even think that that counts as me showing the money that I said I read mikudeshiously with the 200 zuz that I have? It's not your money. So says the Gemara, not necessarily. Pshita, we should ask why should the Mishnah bother teaching lo tzricha dafalgab denokat demei beiska? Because some of that money will come home with him, because he makes a percentage of, let's say he makes 10% of all the money he brings in. So 10% of the money that's in there says afal pikein, says the Gemara, because he's a shulchani, that's not enough. We'll stop right here at this Mishnah. Pick up Emir Hashem tomorrow morning. Wishing you all a beautiful night.